Thank you all for coming. My name is Renard Miller. I'm the chair of Graduate Council this year, which is the arm of the student government that represents graduate student interests. I'd like to welcome you all to GradUCon 2012, which is one of the many examples of the university taking graduate students and our needs seriously. The broad network of people that brought this together worked tirelessly to ensure that graduate student needs are met and cannot be thanked enough. So if you see any of the people who have name tags on who are in charge today, please thank them for their efforts in bringing this all together. The university has twice as many graduate students as undergraduates, and I'm constantly reminded that this fact is not lost on the administration. I hope that you all really take advantage of today and make sure to thank those responsible for putting it together. I appreciate their dedication to improving our student lives as well as our professional development. A quick note before introducing our esteemed panel. Students should not attend the Strengths Quest session unless they have completed the required pre-session preparation. The session will be offered twice to accommodate all participants. Also, please feel free to take a bag from outside that's been being offered by Graduate Student Affairs. They're for your benefit. So with that, I'll introduce the panel. All the way to my right is Dr. Christian Hodnelin, PhD. He joined the William Blair and Company in 2006 and is director of the Healthcare and Investment Banking Group, where he covers the pharmaceutical and biotechnology sectors. Christian has completed 30 M&A and financing transactions. Prior to joining William Blair, Christian was a consultant at WM Biomedical Inc., a medical device startup developing ophthalmic and cardiovascular products. He also spent 3 years as a senior research scientist at Surface Logics, where he managed drug discovery and development programs. Christian received his BS in chemistry from the University of Washington and a PhD in chemistry and an MBA from the University of Chicago. Dr. Deborah Nelson, immediately to my right, joined the University of Chicago's English Department faculty in 1996 after receiving her PhD from the City University of New York. In addition to her research and teaching, Debbie has served as the departmental director of graduate studies and as a director of the Center for Gender Studies, where she launched an exhibit entitled On Equal Terms, The History of Women at the University of Chicago, a collaboration between faculty, graduate, and undergraduate students that produced the first history of women at the university, one that tracks students, faculty wives, and staff. Her second book, Tough Broads, Suffering in Style, is near final form. Currently, Dr. Nelson serves as the Deputy Provost in charge of graduate education. And then in the middle of the panel, we have Ms. Kim Goff-Cruz, who joined the University of Chicago in 2007 as Vice President for Campus and Student Life and Dean of Students in the university. Kim is a member of the President's executive staff. She provides leadership and strategic direction for the Campus and Student Life unit, which includes 350 staff members. Prior to her appointment at the university, Kim served 4 years as the Dean of Students at Wellesley College. Before serving at Wellesley, Kim held positions at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and at Yale University. She was also a practicing attorney. Kim received her BA from Yale College and her JD from Yale Law School. So the way this is going to work is each panelist is going to present for 10 minutes on their career paths and how they got here. And then we're going to open it up for questions from you guys. So with that, I'll turn it over to Debbie Nelson to go first.
If you don't mind, I'm going to stand just because it's easier for me to talk if I'm standing. I want to thank Brooke Noonan and her staff for putting this really amazing event together. This is very important for the Deputy Provost's office, for my office, that we are attending and enriching our graduate students' opportunities to think about their professionalization, to pluralize their notion of their career options, and to get the help that they need, and also to hopefully you'll be able to tell Brooke what more things you would like to see programming about, and we will see to it that we can get that together for you. So I was speaking just briefly to Christian, whom I don't know or hadn't met before, and I realized you're going to hear some very different kinds of stories about career development, because my story is actually governed by, well, I don't want to say it's totally governed by chance, but I want to suggest that it's a lot less premeditated than I think maybe either Kim or Christian. You know, I was not a kid on the playground running around saying I want to be a deputy provost of graduate education. I was not in graduate school thinking I want to go into academic administration, because I think, like many of you, or maybe all of you, I didn't really know how the university worked, and I frankly didn't care. I had really more immediate and pressing considerations, which was the development of my own work. And so I want to say a couple words about my experiences in graduate school, and then how my career sort of evolved here at the University of Chicago, and then I'll turn it over to Kim. So I had a pretty rocky start. I thought I was applying to clinical psychology programs, and I had, up until about a month before the applications were due, I had done everything I needed to do for that, but I couldn't seem to get those applications in the mail. And every time the universities sent me their course catalogs, which in those days came by snail mail, I would sort of tepidly page through the clinical psych courses thinking, God, I really don't want to take that. And then I would see, oh, well, what are they doing over in the English department? So finally, over a cheeseburger at Friendly's, a friend of mine said, why don't you just face facts? You're going to go to English graduate school. So I had to do this mad dash in the last month to take GREs and get letters and all this stuff. So this wasn't the most successful aspect, but I did get into a graduate school. I started at Columbia and ended up leaving Columbia. They had a master's program that cuts you, and I was cut, and I thought, it's a very sordid and complicated story that says a lot about Columbia in the early 1990s, which I won't go into here, but I had a lot of support from the faculty that I was working with, and I just immediately applied to some rolling programs at CUNY, Rutgers, and NYU. And I went to CUNY, frankly, for two reasons. One, because Nancy Miller was there, and I wanted to work with Nancy Miller. And two, because it was the cheapest. And so I went with the cheap option because I had spent most of my money on my Columbia mistake. So, you know, as it turns out, and this is why I think you have to have graduate school requires or certainly benefits from a certain kind of resilience. I thought that it was a political decision why I was not at Columbia, and I ended up at CUNY, and it turned out that this was an absolutely great place for me. I was an older student. I was happy to be around adults, and it turns out that the teaching mission of CUNY, which is a 220,000 student public university with a great many immigrants, was actually very exciting and interesting to me, but I didn't know that that was exciting and interesting to me until I got there. I also had the incredible good luck of having my advisor, Nancy Miller, who has been a lifelong friend and has been a mentor to me for my whole career. And that's a piece of good luck that I wish everyone could have, and you can certainly seek it out. But it's a bit of karma that you get something like that. But you know, Nancy was not warm and friendly to work with, and that was in part why I worked with her. She was very, very demanding. And I remember one time writing my dissertation proposal, I was on the third draft, and she wrote at the top, "You're progressing." And I was like, oh my God, that's so fabulous, I'm progressing. That's about the nicest thing she ever said to me. But it didn't mean she didn't support my work, because she supported it in every way by reading drafts and all that stuff. So you have to sometimes seek out the hard people, because the hard people are really going to make you do the best work you can possibly do. So if I started out with a little bit of bad luck, I ended up with a whole lot of good luck. I got Nancy Miller as my advisor, I had tremendous support at CUNY, and I actually had a very easy time on the job market. And I ended up here. So that's just, frankly, dumb luck. You have to be as prepared as you can possibly be to do everything that's in your power to control. And then the rest of it is up to fate. And this is one of the very strange things about graduate school, and something you should think very deeply about as you go through the process, not just when you apply, not just when you start, but at every year that you are in the program, is, do I want to keep doing this? Because there are other things to do. And there's a certain amount of luck. You're handing the fates a certain amount of control over your future. Some people can tolerate that, some people can't, and they make other decisions. But I think one of the things that always bolstered my own resilience in going through this process was that I kept finding a lot of things that I liked doing that I hadn't expected. So one of the things was teaching really at the boundaries of literacy at CUNY, because I taught a lot of ESL. I had a background in that from another aspect of my life. And so I found that a really compelling message, a really compelling goal, a really compelling work, and was actually quite sad to leave that behind when I came here, because I felt like, wow, the students there actually really need me. The students at the University of Chicago are really going to be pretty much fine whether I'm here or not. So it was a change of direction, but obviously one that had its own rewards and that I've enjoyed tremendously. But I ended up doing this administrative stint. We all come in and out of the administration here at the university, partly because I realized some things about myself as I went along. About 2 minutes. One was that I loved doing my research, and I loved, to some degree, or for stretches of time, the solitary nature of the work that we do as humanists. And the other points, I really wanted to work with other people. I wanted to have a real world impact, and I wanted to be able to get things done. Among faculty administration, this would be true of Kim, competence and non-polarization are about the only two qualities you need to be given actually quite large responsibilities. Because a lot of people don't want to do them, but there's great rewards in, although not by accident, but I did end up being the director of the Center for Gender Studies because I really cared about that. I've been involved in that the whole time, and I knew exactly what I thought the center needed. My vision was shared by other people, and I thought I could get us where that point was, and I think I was able to do that. And the same thing when I was asked to both chair my department last year or become the director of the deputy provost, and I chose the deputy provost because I think higher education is in a massive transformation. I want to be a part of that rather than on the sidelines. I've worked with graduate students my whole career here. I know I've had 34 students defend their dissertations. I've done the placement, and I really think that I know a great deal of what graduate students need here at the university to be successful, both in the academic job market, but also in the non-academic job market. So I'm trying to work on both of those fronts on your behalf and on my own students' behalf. So you end up, I sort of see my path as having seized opportunities that came my way and having been open to the variety of kinds of pleasures and interests one can have in an academic career, which is actually much more varied than you might think as you're walking in the door. All right, so.
Yeah, I'm Christian Hodneland. I've been at the university on a couple of different occasions, once as a PhD student, once as an MBA student, and I'll kind of walk through that progression, but maybe it'd be helpful to talk about what I currently do. I'm in investment banking, and I know, there's certain views out there on investment bankers, so we'll talk about that, but also, it's funny, my wife still doesn't know what I do, so I'll try to explain it to you in just a couple minutes. So I work at a firm, it's actually headquartered here in Chicago. It's called William Blair. It's really a mid-sized firm, about 1,200 employees. And, it's a typical investment bank. And what I do is advisory work. So I'm not a trader. I'm not risking our firm's capital. I'm advising companies. And, typically what I'm doing is either helping another company buy another company, or helping them with a problem they might have. So, if it's a public company, their stock price is going down, they appear to be performing, and they want to know why and how to fix that. So, it entails kind of, pretty much everything, advising them on, maybe what sorts of products they need to bring in, what they should get rid of, helping them with their trading statistics, helping them raise capital, changing their capital structure. It could be a number of different things, but that's, where, I'll talk about the required expertise. I, in particular, work in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries, so my clients are pharmaceutical companies, and I need to understand what's going on internally in each of my clients' companies within the entire industry. So that means what's going on at FDA, what's going on in various geographies in Latin America, China, understand the financials of the companies, So it's a number of different things that I need to bring to bear. But I think what was, very beneficial, especially about my graduate training here, my PhD, was, I need to understand clinical studies, pipelines, how products fit together. If there's one type of sales force, what sort of physician they're calling on. It's just this general knowledge. So, it turns out that many people in my industry, healthcare in particular, are there's some PhDs, but many are physicians by training. So they understand this. And there are a number of other opportunities out there that could benefit from folks who have advanced training more than just business training. So that's just putting things in context. I started off, really after my undergraduate, I went to University of Washington. I wasn't prepared or ready to get a real job, so I bought myself another 5 years by going to graduate school to really think about what I wanted to do. And, I always had some, business aspirations in mind, but I like chemistry. So, I did actually spend a lot of time looking at schools and finding the right advisor. I ended up here in Chicago in part because of, my then girlfriend was moving back to Chicago. But there were a number of good schools to choose from here. And I ended up with a new professor. He was still a postdoc at a different university. He had a position here, but he came back from Boston to do recruiting here. And he had this great vision, and he was, he's an entrepreneur, had a different background. Before he went into academics, he worked on Wall Street. So a very strange background, I think, for most academics. But really an entrepreneur at heart. And he was very focused on commercial, not just scientific applications for the sake of science. But he was very supportive, maybe not initially, but toward the end, that I would go and do something in industry. And he helped me a lot, and I think a big part of that was I was his first student, so I took on risk. And he was very successful here. I think he made tenure after 3 years. So he had a very good run. And because of that, he supported his students immensely. And even to this day, he checks in about once a month with me to see, how he can be useful to me. So I think that was, I know not all advisors are like that, but he was very, very helpful to me. But when I went to my first job, I was a scientist, and I was the PI on a big grant, and we brought it was a $15 million grant, and I spent 9 months working on this and figuring out what the idea was going to be, and writing this 200-page proposal and presenting it to the NIST. And we got funding, and I really had a change of heart when I got a bonus at the end of the year, and the CEO comes to me and says, great work, this is great for the company, here's $5,000. And I said, okay, I'm doing something wrong here. I brought in $15 million, and you gave me $5,000. And I said, I can use the $5,000, it's great, but I want to find a path where I'm getting paid for performance. And I ultimately realized that in the startup world, if you're the CEO or the chief scientific officer, you're going to get paid, but if you're a bench scientist, you've got quite a long road, and it's going to take a number of different new startups to get to the top, and I just didn't have the patience for that. So I went down, I went back to my advisor, and he plugged me in with some people, and I ultimately took a business development position trying to start up a company, and at the same time going to MBA school. And the MBA program was really a stepping stone. I didn't necessarily learn much that was new. It was really more of a networking and interviewing learning experience. Because in the business school, on day one, you start preparing for your interviews, which are going to happen a year later. And that was the big benefit that I got out of that. And I ultimately went to investment banking because I thought it was very challenging. People said that I couldn't do it because I didn't have the traditional finance background that most of the people in the industry had. So I thought it was very challenging. And what I did was I told a story about how my science training And everything that I did in my graduate program, the hours, the lifestyle, critical thinking, the ability to write, would help them. And I think that's what you have to do, is you have to distill it down. You have to first figure out what the job entails, what the key skill sets are, and somehow connect the dots between what you've learned and what you think that job entails. And you've got to be able to tell a very credible story around that. And I did that successfully. I got 6 or 7 offers from all the big banks, and ultimately took the position at William Blair here.
So it's great to see you all. This is our second or third year doing this, and every year it gets better. And I've enjoyed participating every year. So if some of you have heard the story, forgive me, but since I've only had one life, I'll tell the same story. Okay. So I started off, as you might have heard, as an attorney. So I'm representing the MA straight professional people. No PhD. I knew early on PhDs are wonderful, long tradition, but it's like I don't think I'm going to do that. 3 years was enough for me. So I went to law school. I went to Yale Law School. And I said, at the time when I was making a decision about what I wanted to do, I followed the cohort model. It was, at that point, people either went to medical school, they went to business school, or they went to law school. PhDs at Yale weren't really, sorry, we didn't pay attention. So I just did it by process of eliminations. Can't stand blood, MDs out, right? The MBAs, no, couldn't do that either, the math stuff. But the law, I really liked to write, and I was an English major, actually. I like to write and I like to argue, so that seemed to be the most credible option. So I went to Yale College, I went to Yale Law School, had a great run there, and then was practicing law as a bankruptcy attorney on Wall Street for a few years. Now I have to be honest, within 6 months of that job, I said, you know what, this is not a long-term gig for me, right? The goal in law firms, which actually is kind of fun now that I think about it, is it's like intellectual hazing, for 80 hours a week, but you get paid really well. Okay,
that's right.
You get paid really well, but so the job itself had actually very interesting aspects of it that I have built on. But I knew fairly early on that this is not the job that I wanted to have. But for the first time in my life, I actually sat down and did what I call planned serendipity. I actually thought about who am I and what the heck do I want to do? Not the job. That wasn't the question I was asking. But what is it that I want to contribute to society in a real way? And I used a tool, which some of you may know about, which is called What Color is Your Parachute? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, so some of you know. So What Color is Your Parachute, if you do all of those exercises, it's particularly grueling because it's a lot of self-analysis. You have to kind of get down to, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? Who do you want to be around? What kind of environment do you want to be in? You do all these exercises. And by the time you're done, you actually have a pretty good sense of who you are and what you like without a job title attached to it. It was a fabulous program to do for yourself. And I also did the Myers-Briggs, which was really hot at the time. So I did a lot of self-discovery because after all, I am an attorney, I do actually like the process. So I did that. And I discovered I could articulate at that time, and I was in my early 20s, that what I really cared about was my own evolution as a person and everybody else's evolution. I wanted to create environments where people could evolve, particularly in an educational environment. And I was really clear about that. And I wanted to be around smart people and creative people, preferably young people, So I had that kind of, I had the kind of idea, but I had no idea what that job was like, what that was going to be. And so for 4 years, I made a decision. In 4 years, I was going to pay off my student loans. I was making a lot of money, so I could do that, right? So I lived very poorly. I paid off my student loans. And I was going to then start to talk to people about what job might meet that goal. Random people. So I talked to alums, and people would try to convince me somebody tried to convince me to be a lobbyist. That would have been interesting. Okay, so I talked to just different people, random people about this is what I want to do, what job will help me do that. And the day I paid off my last student loan, I got a fax, because we didn't have email then. I got a fax with a job that was the assistant dean of Yale College and director of the Afro-American Cultural Center. Now, who knows what a dean does? Because at the time, I actually had to say I didn't know what a dean does, right? I thought the only dean, you didn't know what it was. You didn't know it, I know. The only dean I really could kind of conceptualize was a dean in Animal House. That really wasn't me. Or my assumption was if it was dean, it's somebody you were getting in trouble. I just didn't see myself in that role. But clearly somebody else did because of what I had described about what I wanted to do. And so I took a look at the job description, and in fact it did fit me, because what it was about trying to create an environment for students to do their best work, in this case at Yale College. And then I had to figure out, how do I describe to an employer why they should hire someone who's sitting on Wall Street, trying to deal with the bankruptcy of Pan Am, right, to go be the dean of students at Yale College. So I had a really good rap, like you did. I figured out, I was able to articulate why my skills actually were relevant, and we can go into that later on if you want to know that. But I was actually pretty clear about who I was, what I wanted to try to do, and why that job made sense. And so 3 weeks later, I resigned my job at the law firm, went to Yale, and then started on what I thought was like going to be a 5-year journey, and trying to be a dean, trying to figure out what that was. Now, I've been a dean for college students. I've actually been a dean for faculty. I've been a chief of staff to a president. I've actually done all of these different things, answering the same question, pursuing the same dream about trying to create an environment, but just doing it from different perspectives. I've had a lot of fun doing it, and most of the time, the jobs have come to me. This job is a great job. This job actually is about trying to figure out how you support the life outside the classroom for 15,000 students, right? And all of your wonderful academic careers. Some of you are here for 1 year, some of you are here for 12, some of you somewhere in between, not anymore. But it's also interesting because, the oldest student is 16, the youngest student is 16, the oldest student is 88. There's a whole bunch of age ranges in there. So it's always fascinating to try to figure out, how do you create one environment that supports the evolution of all those different types of people? It's like the holy grail for me in terms of what I actually want to do. And I think that one of the things that has been important to my own journey is being, again, clear about what I want to do as a life, and always checking in with, does this job make sense, does this job not make sense, and being open to opportunities, but actually having really good mentors and people who have been watching me and will come to me with an opportunity saying, we think this actually makes sense for you for your next step. And in fact, what happened just recently, I think I announced to most of you that I'll be leaving to go back to Yale to take on another job, was, again, an example of a mentor saying, okay, at this point, we think this job, we actually need help in this particular job. This is now going to be secretary of the university and also their first ever vice president, dean of students. And it's because of my relationships with them, because of the things I've done, and being open to the possibilities. But again, it was really about being clear, being open, as we said, it's kind of planned serendipities, having some sense of what would make sense for you, but being open to how that looks.
Okay, and with that, we're going to open it up to questions. The way we're going to do this is I'll walk around the room with a microphone.
Okay, my name is Melissa. I'm in the MA-PH program, Masters of Arts program in the Humanities. And I guess this is for you. I was wondering, you said you could describe more specifically how you translated your experience as a lawyer into skills that could help you become a dean. So I was hoping you could say more about how you framed that.
Okay. So there's a couple things I did. One is that really going through that exercise, the exercises in What Colors Your Parachute gives you a sense of your skill set and what your favorite skills are. That was really helpful. And then also, even when I think about it now, Strength Quest, which I think you have access to, is another good tool that will help you actually identify the kinds of things that you like to do and the ways to describe yourself. But at that time, what I was able to say is, as a bankruptcy lawyer, basically you're doing a lot of research and writing, but you're dealing with people at a critical point in their life, people and organizations at a critical point in their life in terms of managing change, helping them manage change. And you have to really have really great counseling skills, very good listening skills. You have to be able to see the big picture. You have to have some organizational abilities. And you've got to be a quick study. You have to, because like in your business, you learn different businesses, you learn different projects fairly quickly in the role of bankruptcy lawyer. So I gave them a sort of like 2 or 3 different things, skill sets that were directly applicable. Plus, I was able to say that in my night job, I actually did a lot of work with young people. I mean, I did my 80 hours or 100 hours, whatever it was, during the day, but I also spent a lot of time volunteering, and I was able to talk about the fact that I was not just doing this piece of the work, I was actually volunteering with young women, talking about education, and in the context of the job that I was doing as an attorney, when I represented unions, who were, their companies were going bankrupt and I was trying to get their money for them. So a lot of times I was talking to people about, okay, you don't have a job now, what is it that you do the next steps? How do you get an education? So I could talk about very specific stories about what I was doing while I was even as an attorney that was relevant to that job. And also I'm really passionate about education, really, really passionate about education. So I think, and one of the gifts I think I had was they were willing to say, you don't have any bad habits because you don't know anything, so we can train you. So sometimes you actually want somebody who's willing to be open to a different kind of a person and willing to do the work on training. I think that helped me too.
I'm Catherine and I'm in the MA-PH program. I guess I've been reading and hearing a lot about kind of problems in higher education, and especially with people taking out loans and not getting jobs. And so I guess could any of you speak to problems in higher education and fears about kind of people following their interests but not necessarily their, a job goal?
One of the psychoses of graduate school, you must necessarily be psychotic in this way, and that is that the statistics on employment have been the same for decades, and that there are many more PhDs than there are academic jobs. And in a very successful department, they'll be placing 50 to 60% of their students, which means 40 to 50% are not getting academic jobs. That is the reality. That has been the reality, and that will, if anything, get worse, not better, at least in the short term, because we have to see how this, if you remove state funding from institutions of higher education, state-funded education educates 80% of America's undergraduates. So if you are going to defund that, and you're going to change the basic structure of how that education is provided, large lecture classes, online learning, stuff like that, you reduce your need for faculty. So, that's just going to have an impact. There's no way around that, and the political climate we're in, we know the discussions about education we're having. It's the absolutely worst thing we could possibly do to ourselves, but that's what we're doing to ourselves at this moment. So one of the things I think you have to do throughout your career as a graduate student is be thinking about all the different ways you can participate in the thing that you love that might not mean classroom teaching or actually ongoing research. There are different ways to write and communicate about arts and humanities. There are different ways of being involved in people's education. There is that can benefit from the training you have. There's high school education. God knows we need a giant cadre of highly educated, really enthusiastic teachers in our high schools. Community colleges are the fastest growing sector of American higher education and have been for the past decade. Those are students who are on the boundary between high school and college. They really need the skills that will make them successful in college. They also need really good teaching. So there's the teaching aspect. There's many avenues to that aren't a tenure track position. I'm not recommending piecing together adjunct positions. I think that is a form of self-exploitation that really you have to really think about why you're choosing to piece together these things when you realistically know they're not turning into a tenure track job. You might do that for a few years and it's fine. I just think anybody who tries to make a career of it is not facing facts in some ways and not finding something more satisfying that would be a full-time position. Academic, as Kim's network, there's a variety of ways of being involved in education that have to do with things other than classroom teaching, but that are incredibly beneficial to students and enable them to be successful in the classroom, and that's very satisfying. So there's lots of different ways. One of the things I like about academia, having been lucky enough to get a tenure track position at the time that I did, which was a very bad time, and having been able to get tenure, is that one of the things that's made me happy doing it is that it's actually much more varied than I initially ever really thought about. And so I like that variety. It's like having multiple careers within the same institution. And that's very satisfying. But I think you have to think very broadly about what it means to be an educator, what it means to be invested in your discipline, and how that can be mobilized on behalf of students in a variety of contexts. There's adult learning. There's millions of different ways of doing this. But you have to be open to them, and you have to extend yourself into those opportunities to get some experience and figure out what's going to happen. You have to do some experimentation, because our graduate students, it's an immutable fact of life. No matter how great we were, Harvard has this problem, Yale has this problem, every Ivy Plus institution has the same placement issues that we have, is that some of their students, and very, very good students, are not going to have academic tenure track employment. So at every stage, you need to be asking yourself, is this the path you want to be on? And what are the other paths open to you? And we're trying to help you see more of those paths.
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm working on my PhD in biomedical science. I forgot your name, but Dr. Investment Banker. So you mentioned a turning point for you when you received a $5,000 bonus after receiving a $15 million grant. And that was an indicator that maybe pursuing bench science wasn't the way to go. Were there any indicators of that earlier on in your graduate school career? And if so, what were they?
You know, when I went to graduate school, it was in the 90s, and, you know, there was the internet boom going on, biotech boom going on. So, you know, we all had the impression that, you know, you could just go off to a small company and it was going to go public, and your options were going to be worth something, and you were going to be a millionaire. And, you know, so that was, and there were cases of that. You know, I knew in my first job, you know, we had the executive assistant, you know, he was 28 years old and, you know, worked for a company called Millennium Pharmaceuticals, which, you know, went to $400 a share, and, you know, he had a lot more than I did, and he was the executive assistant. So, you know, I think that dream perpetuated for a little while, and it turned out to really dissolve. And, you know, just the way the math works on these things, you really gotta, for the most part, if you're not the founder or the CEO, you're not gonna make much except gain some experience. You know, I would say though, there was the only turning point for me in graduate school was, you know, it was the decision about going into academia versus industry. And I had two practical issues, and it sounds silly, but I wasn't averse to going into academics. I wanted to live in a big city, and so, and I know it sounds very trivial, but I said there aren't very many academic positions in big cities. So what am I going to do if my advisor pushes hard for me, and we collectively make the decision that I'm going to go down that path, and I get this great job at University of Illinois in Champaign? I would feel obligated to take that position, but I knew I wouldn't be happy living there. So as silly as that sounds, that was one factor that went into this. The other one was just the pace of research. I was telling somebody earlier before the panel started that my first year, I had a great year. My first year doing research, I had 2 publications, everything worked. Then I had 2 years where nothing worked, and then I had people who I didn't necessarily get along with in my lab who were just publishing, and they were, you know, letting everybody else in the group know that that was the case, and that they were much better than everybody. That was frustrating. I just did not like, you know, you have a long time to reflect in your PhD program, and what I learned about myself was I need short-term defined goals, and that's the environment in which I work best. And so I really started to piece together what my ultimate career path was back then. I knew I liked to think about things. I did not mind hard work, but I couldn't go on for 3 years without knowing there's a goal. And 3 years is fine if you knew there's a goal at the end, but 3 years just weaving, it just was very unsatisfying to me. So, you know, that was the other checkpoint that, you know, in my career here at the university, where I knew I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, I just knew what I did want to do. And I think it takes some time, you know, as you can both figure out, as you both mentioned, it takes 5, 6, 7, 8 years to really figure out what the right position for you is.
right, and with that, would you all like to join me in thanking our panelists?